So when I knew he had this problem, my response to Celeste asking me about my involvement in her estate was strictly to say, and I did say, all I want to make sure, honey, is that my living here with you, the life we're sharing together, that I am not going to be thrown out on the street the next day that, God forbid, you're taken from me. I want to make sure that I am protected for at least a reasonable amount of time, so I could find an alternative living situation. I want to be able to stay with a roof over my head. I said, I don't know how long. This at the time we were having this relationship, this conversation, we were only together, like I said, 2.5, almost 3 years. But I was anticipating this marriage going on, even though Celeste said she was only going to last 3 years. I was hoping, like I said, God willing, many, many more years. And looking back, Scott, we've been together 12 years now, okay? Mm-hmm. I'm not a fool. I knew that if I loved and care for her the way my love dictates, and she, God willing, through His blessings, makes it through whatever He had, challenges we had ahead of us, we could potentially be together 10, 15, 20 years. People live to be 100. We met when she was 79. And I wasn't about to, at the age of 60, be thrown out of my ear the next day just because her kids had animosity towards me. So my response to her was, Celeste, I cannot answer that question as to what you want to leave me. That's really your decision. I said, but I do want you to protect my home, my living situation, so that the next day I'm not thrown out on my ear. And she goes, would you, and she even asked, she goes, you wouldn't want to live in this house all by yourself, would you? I said, no, I'm not saying that I need to live here indefinitely. I just don't want them to be able to exercise the hatred and their animosity that I'm sensing. So just protect my living situation. So that was how that situation started, okay? Then, what happened is about a month and a half, 2 months later, I discovered in a tablet Celeste had written down. Let me go back there. Let me qualify something. The quote that the New York Times made was actually a combination of more than one conversation. Okay? Mm-hmm. So 2 months later, approximately, or a month and a half, I actually found a notebook or tablet. I was in the office looking for some paper to write on. It wasn't like I was going through anything. But anyway, I was looking for a paper, and I found a tablet. I flipped through to look for a blank page, and then flipping through, I saw this in pen written by Celeste Holm in her own hand. In the case of my demise, I want to leave Frank Basile $200,000, and she signed it. And so when I found this, what do you say? The next opportunity I had to speak with Celeste, we were in bed again, because that's when we did most of our talking. It seemed like we both kind of met, after the course of a busy day. But I said, listen, honey, I brought it to her attention that I found this notebook, and I saw that she had written that. And she said to me, is that enough? And I said, honey, that's for your, and again, I repeated the same thing. That is for you to decide. It's not about whether 200,000 is enough or not. I said, the reason I'm bringing it to your attention is for this reason. If you want that to be what you're leaving for me, it's not official if you're just writing it into a notepad. She goes, it isn't? I said, no. You actually have to present this and have it written up by your executor or your attorney and make sure that it's part of your legal papers. So she goes, she goes, well, maybe I could talk to Dan about that. I said, okay, because I thought he was. It wasn't like I was trying to exclude even her son from being involved in the situation. But the point is that she had written it in a tablet and didn't really present her wishes in an official setting. And I wanted to make sure that she was doing right by herself. Does that make sense to you?
I do. I guess my question would be, based on that, because they're talking figures in the New York Times.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you based on that. Okay. I had that piece of paper. I was basically aware of this piece of paper. I was aware that Celeste had $200,000. Okay. And then what happened? This is why it became an issue. Okay. I didn't care if it was $2 or $200,000. All right. But when we found the piece of paper and I realized it wasn't done in such a way that it protected her or made it a legitimate expression of her will or her wishes, I encouraged her to take it to somebody else to have them do it properly. In the course of that conversation, now we're talking a second conversation, I told her, I didn't tell her, she said to me, she goes, is $200,000 enough? And I said, again, that is really your decision. And she said, well, the real problem is, and Celeste mentioned it to me, she said, the real problem is, I don't really know what I'm worth. She goes, I'm not sure what I'm worth, you know. She goes, money's never meant anything to me my entire life. She goes, I've always worked. I've always been able to provide for myself. And that's what her son was taking advantage of. He even said it over the course of all of this litigation. My mother was never really good with finances. I mean, I'm not making this up. Even her son said, my mother's never really good with finances. She wanted me to be involved. So for her to say to me, the problem is I don't even know what I'm worth, is consistent with everything her son was saying. And why we had the next conversation, part of that conversation. I didn't just walk in there and pick, you know, with a piece of paper and say, hey, by the way, I took it upon myself to calculate what you're worth. She and I had a conversation. And in the course of it, she said, the problem is, I want to leave you, but I don't really know what I'm worth. So that's when we started to discuss, well, I mean, I could add it up for you. And, you know, just looking at the apartment, we knew it was worth more than $200,000. We knew in her bank that she had more than $200,000. And she had a farm in New Jersey. We knew it was worth more than $200,000. So, yes, by the time you add it up, you say, you know, honey, it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 million. And it was, then she said exactly what the article said. Well, that's not enough then. Well, so I was trying to help her make an educated decision for herself. The problem here, Scott, is this. Now, this is where this is where it comes in again, where whether she signed the trust of her own free will with full knowledge or deception. Here's the problem. Her son showed up to the house with an attorney and an accountant 2 weeks before November 22nd in 2002. Okay? And that was approximately 4 months after this conversation that she and I had in bed. And the accountant and her son and the lawyers drafted a trust, or I didn't know it was a trust. I wasn't in the room, but I was around the corner, and it was talking softly, and it was hard to hear. So I couldn't really put all the pieces together. But I noticed that Celeste wasn't doing any of the talking. And that concerned me. And they were asking her questions, is this okay, is this okay? And she wasn't responding verbally, so I can only imagine she was shaking her head yes or no. And I heard them say, you want to leave Frank Basile, you're going to leave him $20,000. Now that wasn't in the New York Times, you understand? Mm-hmm. They said, you're going to leave Frank Basile $20,000. And I didn't hear anything, I didn't hear her say yes or no. But what I did, what that did to me was say, who the hell are they representing here? Excuse my language if that's not allowed on the air.
No, that's okay.
Okay, but the point is if I was never left $200,000, they, in forming the trust, saw to it that I was left $20,000, and the reason they did that is there's a legal loophole, okay, that a person could exercise after a relationship. And it says this: if a person is cut out of an estate after having a long-time relationship, and I'm not a lawyer, but I'm paraphrasing all this, but if you have a marriage, if you're married or if you're in a monogamous and a palimony kind of marriage, after 7 years they consider you husband and wife. But if you're in a relationship for a long time and a person passes away and you're not in their estate at all, you can question the validity of the estate plan. And the only way to close that loophole is to provide even the smallest amount, anything, to that person in your estate. And then somebody who's the benefactor of that estate can claim this was their wish, this is what you got. But see, when I heard them say $20,000, it wasn't about the amount that I was only getting $20,000. What bothered me was it wasn't what Celeste had said she wanted. And that made me very concerned that nothing they were doing was representing her wishes. And that's why Celeste and I had this subsequent conversation to where I said, honey, I think they may be trying to take your control. And she said, no, they're not. Anything they're doing, I can change later. It doesn't matter. And I said, okay. If that's the truth, great. Because if I was really into $200,000 and not $20,000, I would have run in the room that day and said, what the hell are you guys doing? I'm entitled to $200,000. It was not about the money. It was about getting her wishes represented fairly and accurately. And they were not willing, they weren't interested in that. They were trying to protect their inheritance. So what happened is the trust was signed for me to receive $20,000, and that was just one of many ambiguities that the trust did not reflect Celeste's wishes. First and foremost, her control was taken from her, all right, in her apartment. And but there was that $20,000 that I could hear clearly that made me realize they weren't representing her wishes. The kids turn around, and they're the ones that said to the New York Times that he was given $200,000, and then he had to argue to get equal share with my father. Well, again, it was never agreed that I was to receive $200,000, and it was. I think I said enough. That pretty much, the $200,000 wasn't even the issue. It was about getting Celeste's wishes represented, and the $200,000 came about in conversation as a normal conversation with two people who love each other that would be discussing their estate plan, and the kids are lying. There was never $200,000 written in there. It was $20,000, and that just became one of the indications, one of the red flags to show that the whole thing didn't really represent Celeste's wishes.
Frank, I guess one thing in that bunch there that sticks out in my mind is you had said that you had talked with Celeste and that you didn't want it the day after, God forbid, anything happens to her, want to be thrown out in the street. But then when the initial conversation went on about $200,000 with her, you had said, you didn't care if she left you $2 or $200,000.
Right.
But I guess the implication is that you did want something so you wouldn't have to be thrown in the street the next day.
Thrown in the street the next day is not about money.
Okay.
Thrown in the street the next day is about being treated with dignity.
Right.
You understand that?
I agree that.
All right. That's what that's about. It's about, this is a human being that shared hopefully 10, 20 years with a woman and a wife and created a home and a life together, not an interloper. And I wanted to be treated with the dignity I deserved. I must say, I'll give you a little bit of background on me, okay? I graduated from college and moved to Europe right afterwards to live with my father because he was living in Germany and I had an opportunity to work in the opera company in Augsburg, Germany. I was 24 years old. My father and I were talking about him becoming my personal manager, and I was living with him for 4 months. And 2 months, and then the opera had finished, and 2 weeks after the opera had finished, my father died of a massive coronary heart attack. I packed up in the course of 2 days before I got on a plane to come back to the United States to bury my father in Arlington Cemetery. I packed up everything I had that was in my own possession, which was 2 suitcases of clothes, and I had $100 in my pocket. Now, it wasn't the $100 that bothered me, because as soon as my father, we had the funeral a week later, I went to work. I started caring for myself. But the problem was I didn't have a home over my head. I didn't have a place. I didn't have I had a sister. My sisters came in from their homes around the country. My mother flew in for the funeral. But when they were gone, when the funeral was over, they all went to their prospective homes. One in Hawaii, one in Kansas City, one in Pennsylvania. My mother went to Utah. My home was in Virginia. Outside of being with my father in Europe and my 6 years at Indiana University, I grew up in Virginia. And that was my home, but my father had moved to Germany 2 years earlier, so we didn't even have a residence there. But I wanted to stay where it was familiar to me after my dad died. And I was, I moved in with some friends to the church that I was involved with, and I was, 4 wonderful guys that were just willing to let me, sleep on a cot. But I didn't want to have to go through that experience again. Not at 55 or 60. You understand?
Oh, I totally understand. And Frank, I got to tell you here, I sincerely appreciate your honesty and answering the questions that I've asked. I think that's a hard thing to do at some points because it is very personal on some levels. And I do thank you immensely for taking the time to do this interview and speaking from the heart, which I believe you've done by my account for this interview.
You're welcome. And you want to say hello to Celeste?
I would love to do that. I think the audience would love that. I would love that.
Okay. And by the way, I must tell you something. Celeste speaks from the heart, too. And that's how I know that she was a great mother. She's got a beautiful heart, and she shares it openly. And I can't imagine her ever have been anything but a loving, great example. All you have to do is look at the body of her work to know that her children had a mother they could respect and admire and be proud of. That alone should have made them better children, better people. You understand?
I can imagine, absolutely.
Okay? So, with that in mind, she and I share that passion. Honey, there's somebody on the phone. His name is Scott Spears, right, Scott?
Right.
And he's doing an interview in Ohio. And the listening audience would like to hear your voice. So, Scott?
Yes?
Scott, can you hear me?
Yes.
Honey, I need you for just a second. Scott?
Yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Give me just a second. I'm just going to get her to sit up just a second. The phone doesn't quite reach, I just noticed. Hold on one second. Now it does.
Sure.
I'm going to repeat what I just said. Honey, I'm on the phone with Scott Spears. He's doing a radio interview in Columbus, Ohio. He's got the scoop from me, but he may have a few questions he'd like to ask you.
All right.
And have you say, Scott, feel free to ask her. She may not remember all the specifics about this court case, but you know what? I think she could answer her specifics about me.
I certainly would do that.
All right, hold on one second. I'm going to put you on speaker for her, okay?
Thank you.
Scott?
Yes. Celeste, how are you?
Scott?
Yes?
I know I can hear it.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Celeste, how are you? Miss Holm, how are you doing?
Okay, so far. How are you?
I'm very glad. I'm very happy to be speaking to an Academy Award winner.
Oh, thank you.
What was it like to win the Academy Award?
Well, it was a happy time. I mean, you have a tremendous sense of being appreciated, which is very, very pleasant.
Celeste, tell me your feelings on your husband, Frank.
On my husband's what?
What are your feelings on him?
Well, I adore him.
And the situation involving your children right now, what do you think of that?
Well, I think the relationship could be A little better, but we do rather well.
So you are okay with your children right now? No bad feelings?
I don't think so.
That's
May I add something into this, Scott?
Sure, go ahead.
Since we're here together on the phone. Celeste?
Well, he's got me on the phone.
I know, honey. Can you hear me, honey? The same question, after reminding her about a few facts, you might have a different answer.
Sure.
That's what I mean by somebody helping her make an informed decision.
I understand.
So if I were to say, honey, and this is where I hated to, by the way, Scott, to always have to remind my wife, because it was always like having to hurt her all over again by reminding her of the ugly truth every time. You know, the blessing of the memory loss was a blessing and a curse. Okay?
Yes.
So, honey.
Yes.
Do you remember being in a lawsuit for the last 8 years with your children?
Oh, yes.
Remembering that, your feelings towards your kids? What was the question? How do you feel about your kids?
Well, I think we've done rather well.
Who's we?
My children and me.
Well, okay. In light of the lawsuit?
Sure, in light of everything. I'm not going to be nailed on the wall for the rest of my life over some one issue. Come on.
Well, see, she doesn't even remember the whole issue. That, Scott, this has been the problem. It really has been the problem. Well, honey,
go ahead.
The thing is, honey, when was the last time you saw your son Dan?
Oh, I think a couple of years ago.
And do you know when that's not too far away. Do you remember under what circumstances you saw him?
No.
It was sitting across the negotiating table for a settlement.
Oh.
And I'm going to, Scott?
Yes?
Her children walked into that table, into that room, and didn't even say hello to their mother. And when she left that room, she said, do you remember that, Celeste?
I think so, yes.
They didn't even say hello to her. And she was very hurt. And she said, why are they being so distant? Why are they angry? And that was the last time she saw them. And that was in 2006. Okay? That was the first time. That was the last time she saw them across the table. Her son, Ted, has been here since.
Yes.
And like I told you, he's made 3 attempts and been offered the time to see his mother since he's made those attempts. But it's funny that they act as if they wanted to act to her as if everything was okay between them and her. But so when they would see her, Ted would come up and kiss her on the cheek and act like nothing was wrong, even though we were meeting in the court over a lawsuit. And it seemed like it was playing on her lack of memory. Celeste wasn't even sure why we were sometimes going down to the courthouse.
Yes.
Celeste, at this point in your life, 94 years, what a great life. Do you have any fears?
None.
I am very glad to hear that. Do you live a good life?
Oh, yes.
I am very happy to hear that. How are you feeling today, Miss Holm? Are you feeling well?
Yes, of course.
Well, I have to tell you, you are a dear lady to a lot of people all over this country, and I think that's why we stay interested in what's going on with your life, and one heck of an actress, without a doubt. Where do you keep your Academy Award?
On the piano.
Beautiful. Miss Holm, it is an honor to talk to you, and I hope it's not the last time.
I hope not, too.
Scott?
Yes?
Thank you.
Can I ask? I wasn't sure what you had asked Celeste earlier.
Oh, yes, it was what is her feeling toward Frank?
I adore him.
And what kind of husband has he been?
Caretaking, warm, funny, and very responsible.
Celeste, I just want to ask you this because I asked Frank this, and if you don't want to answer, feel free not to answer. Why would a 80-something-year-old woman marry a 40-something-year-old gentleman?
Because I love him.
There you go. Celeste, as I said, it's been a pleasure. Please stay well, and I hope we talk again, as I say.
All right.
Frank,
Okay.
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. You know, Scott,
Yes?
I know you can edit this thing in and out, and it's important to me because to get some things clear. As you can hear, you know, Celeste doesn't necessarily, honey, I love you, honey, and it's all meant with true respect here.
Fine.
But I think, Scott, you can hear that she doesn't really remember much, if anything, of the details of the lawsuit.
Right.
And that's been part of the challenge. Because if I were to remind my wife that she's at a threat of losing her apartment, she might not say, oh, everything's great. But she doesn't live with that constant knowledge that that's what's happened here, or that her children actually threatened to move her out within 2 years.
Is she still listening right now?
I would hope so, because I don't talk in circles around. I don't talk, you know, secrets from my wife.
Good. Well, Celeste, being that Frank has said that, the prospect of losing your home, what would that do to you at this point in your life?
I don't know. We'd manage.
Celeste,
Yes.
do you want to move out of your home?
Well, of course not.
Okay.
You want me to?
No.
You
And
think I should?
no, I don't.
You think I would want to?
No, of course not, honey. That's why I've been trying to fight for your behalf to stay here.
All right, then what's this?
But some people try to say you should move out, and those people happen to be your sons.
That's crazy.
Well, there you go, guys.
Yeah. And this has been very frank and very honest. And Frank, I thank you. And Miss Holm, I thank you. And it's I hope it's settled soon. I guess that's the best we can hope for.
Yes, I think that's a good way of putting it.
I do too.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Scott Spears, headed for the dugout.
On the car ride, we'll need something to